Katie, Councilmember Katie Lepari-Shu.
Here.
You're here. Councilmember Len Carson.
Here.
You're here. And Councilmember Michael Forster Rothbard said that he will be running a little bit late. All right, so welcome everybody. It's our first budget review committee meeting. First of all, did everybody get the budget, the outline for today? The committee charge on here for us to review?
I did receive it, yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna start with that, and go over our directive today, and then move on to how we're gonna do this work together. You know, what kind of process we'll follow, how we'll proceed with this work, all right? Okay, so first of all, our committee charge. We have the purpose of our committee is to review the current budget, determine specific opportunities for savings in 2026, and if applicable, 2025. No expectation to balance the budget through proposed cost reductions, but rather identifying such potential savings that the requirement for added funding is reduced proportionally. Okay, so our attendance, of course, is going to be us, city administrator, and as needed for other attendees. All right, and then really the meat of it here is the procedure, okay? So agendas, procedure for the agenda, and supporting material, meeting minutes. Our meetings are going to be available on YouTube, meeting conducted with following goals. Okay, so public input, that's one piece I know we like to talk about, and that's something that I think would be important, and I think Mike had ideas about that as well, so let's wait until he gets here to talk more about that. The agenda, okay, so we're gonna have we'll determine, you know, how, you know, we wanna go through the budget, determine which items we wanna work on, in what order, and then, you know, how we'll get them on the agenda, okay? A template, okay, there has been a template devised for us to use, that we can go over, right here, that will give us some guidelines about what we should be looking at as we go through that. So kind of like we have for some of our other committees, that form where we'll use it to report back to the council in a memo style. Is that something that we want to print or share, Greg, so that everybody can see? Because I don't know that everybody has seen that form yet, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think we did. Because we should go over that. So that'll be our template for assessment of individual budget lines and how it'll impact the city services and the community's expectations of its safety, infrastructure, quality of life. So like one of the things we did, like when we were creating a draft for this assessment document, was making sure that, you know, we keep in line with the strategic and comprehensive plans to keep our work focused. Okay, and then what do we go on to? Specific questions regarding budget lines and expenditures provided. Okay, so this gives us a structure for providing, you know, requests so that we're making those requests in, you know, together to the city administrator through that form, and then it gives an expectation of when we'll get responses back, okay? And I know the idea was that if we determine our questions at one meeting, okay, and then we can get some responses back 10 working days, that'll give us time prior to the next meeting to think about those responses and, you know, continue planning with that information. Does that make sense to everybody?
What's the 10 days?
Yeah, that's what is written in here, was 10 working days.
Mm-hmm. And so you're going to have us conversing via email after that?
I think the idea is that we'll get the information back by email, so that that'll give us, you know, the rest of that, thank you, the rest of that month to review those responses, so then we can discuss them at the next meeting.
Okay. So in essence, it should give us 20 days
business days, so probably less than 20, but yeah. I think that's where the 10 came from, was an estimation of about 2 weeks. And then, you know, this chunk here, the next chunk is about the immediate and projectable impact, so that's gonna be important as we go through, you know, looking at identified cost-saving measures in the budget, possible reductions, you know, how would that impact the services for the city overall? So we're gonna be coming up with narratives and supporting documentation that will back that up so that we have all of our ducks in a row when we present anything to council for a vote. What else here? Okay. And then reporting, and then at common council meetings, I'll provide a report, a general report of what we're doing in our meetings, and what's the final one here? Discussion of individual items. Okay. All right. So the idea, what that's clarifying is that the discussion of those individual items wouldn't happen during the report. It'll happen after we process through those items at our meeting. Okay?
Sure.
All right. So the actions for the first committee were here, and that's pretty much what our agenda is now.
Okay. So those were provided to you by, so that's not something you developed,
No,
right? So
that's what the
we-
mayor provided for us.
Gotcha. Okay, so we have that, and I think that provides like a decent amount of guidance in terms of process. I really wanted to hear from, and I want to hear from Mike as well, what, you know, obviously this is sort of the mayor's vision of this, but this isn't a committee that was born of the mayor's imagination, so I'm interested to hear what, obviously we've had some time to think about what we expect to, you know, gain from this process, and what, I don't know, experience or lens we're bringing to it. So I was sort of hoping that we could discuss as a committee, you know, where we hope to get
Yeah,
to as
your
well.
expectations, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool.
Do you want to go ahead and start then?
No, I'd love to hear from everybody else. You're the chair, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, really what I imagine part of the reason that I was selected for this is because, you know, going through the budget process in the past year, that was my first experience with that. I learned a lot, and I know one of the things that I said was that I would like to see how we start budget process earlier in the year. And so that's really, you know, what I'm looking at is just, you know, getting more into that budget process so that we're more prepared, you know, for the next time that this comes up for the full council.
Cool. Yeah, so you see this really impacting our budget process late 2025 into the 2026 budget. That's sort of the outcome that you're anticipating?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to see us getting to a balanced budget. That's ultimately where we need to get to. You know, I've been doing some research at the state government level and the federal government level to understand expectations of municipalities and the budget process. There's some government agencies I can share the links with you on, but it's, from their experience, it's not always based on raising the tax levy rate. 9 out of 10 of those that I read, there is an expectation that you need to lower your expenses. And so with Ginny's insight of being here as a long-term employee, I expect that we'll be leaning heavy on you to what areas we're going to be able to do that on. And then communicating with the general public. For me, there is nothing in here really that says we want to have an open dialogue with the expectations. Even our strategic plan that this council worked on didn't really reach out to the public and say, hey, what is your expectations of services?
And a lot of people, sorry to interrupt, don't even know that we did it. Someone
Correct.
asked me, like, when's
Correct.
the last time
And I'm
we had a
getting the same-
planning session?
Yeah, and I'm getting the same feedback, I'm sure, Elaine, you're getting the same feedback, that the general public, they don't know what level of services we provide now, and but they do understand that each neighbor has a different thought process of what services should be. I mean, for me, and this is I guess this is our starting 6th year, right? That,
Seventh year.
we're starting our 7th?
Starting your 7th year, I think.
No, 6, but,
6th year?
yeah.
Just feels long.
but, the first thing I'm always hit up on is Department of Public Works. That is literally the first thing everybody talks about, streets and sidewalks. And so, for me, Elaine, I would like to make sure that we're listening to the general public. That maybe this is an opportunity that, as council members, we're reaching out to our wards. Maybe we have a unified survey of expectation of surveys. I just think that we have an opportunity to not only listen to ourselves, but listen to the general public. And maybe that'll help steer not only the budget process, but the strategic plan. So that's where I'm headed.
Cool.
And just to be clear, like when you say a balanced budget, because I know our 2025 budget is balanced, but I get the impression you don't mean the way that it's balanced. So what does balanced budget mean to you?
Revenue in pays for the expenses. As Ginny had said to us multiple times, it is not her long-term or our long-term goal to rely on unrestricted fund balance to balance out operations.
So you're
And that
looking
is
for-
in line 100% with every agency that I was looking on referencing. They all say the exact same thing. It's good for exactly what Ginny said, purchasing items, but it's not meant for supplementing or substituting for your operations. So we need to have a balanced budget.
And Mike, just to catch up, we went over the committee directive and overview, and you got that one in email, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we went over that already. Do you want to come back to the thing? I'm jotting it down because it's coming up again already. And now we're just talking about our expectations for, what we're doing here. So,
Okay,
do you want to go ahead?
I apologize for my hour and a half commute, took me 2 hours today.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh.
Do you want to go
I
ahead
mean,
then,
it's-
since he's settling in?
Sure, yeah. No, I'm gonna put you on the spot. No, and this is something that I asked about. I've been thinking about it a lot. Obviously it's something that was, I was part of the, couple people who really felt like this needed to happen. I think that, Elaine, to your point, a lot of what we get on council is like within a short time frame that is like slight sort of veers in one direction or another, that we can make based on the work that's been done that goes into that, by the finance director and city administrator and involved parties. But I think that if we begin to look at it earlier, we gain a deeper understanding. I have learned so much in the not quite 7 years that I've been here, in the 5 years, I guess it is. Which makes sense, because 7 is older than my kid. I ran when I had just had him, so I can use that as a marker. But yeah, I think that when people come in, you're presented with a budget. Sometimes it's your very first experience. It's a huge budget. It's not school district large, but it's big, and it's there's so much to understand, and there's a timeline, and you kind of advance it year after year, and I think that once then you gain a deeper understanding, or I should say that doesn't really allow for council to say, wait a minute, do we feel like this process and the way that we operate makes sense? And to Len's point, it can't, because we spend so much more than we take in. We've had to balance our budget with general fund balance, as you mentioned. I think Greg did a really great job 2 years ago, which unfortunately you guys weren't yet here for. We went over basically department by department, and I think that was a really great kind of foray into council understanding the impact on the decisions that we make. I think
that if we begin the budget process earlier, like we're doing, we have the opportunity to do something like that, to create a framework, to understand how the choices that we make will impact the city, and then make those choices strategically, rather than I don't want to say in haste, but under pressure. Yeah, so I think for me this is about, and I hope this will continue, it's not about rectifying one year's budget in a knee-jerk reaction in my mind. This is about creating something, a process whereby council is involved in budget preparation based on our guiding documents so that we can move forward in a fiscally sustainable way. So thank you. That's it. Mike, I'm sorry, you're the last to go. You have nowhere else to go.
I can gather from what you said what the question was, but did you have a specific question?
Oh, the question was just what are we expecting, you know, from the work that we're doing here on the committee?
My concern, I have three concerns I've been thinking about this. The first concern is that I feel like the city has continually over the past few years cut things from the budget, and that I don't feel like we have I mean, I'm newer than any of you, so maybe I'm wrong, but my perspective is we don't have a bloated budget. We don't have a lot of extraneous expenses that are, like the easy pickings already been picked. And so how can we work on defining the budget as needed without cutting services? I look back at that memo that you guys talked about at last council meeting that was before I was on, like with the,
Oh, yeah.
like of all the like things, I think it was from Greg, all the, like if we were to cut this much in the budget, these are all things that we'd have to cut, and like, I don't wanna go down that road. So what I'm really interested in is looking at efficiencies for one, because I feel like there are probably a lot of good ideas. Any organization I've worked for, people who are like most on the ground have ideas that don't necessarily get reported up the chain of
Yeah.
things that could be done to do things better. And in this committee specifically, done financially better, but you know there are other ideas out there too, I'm sure. So I would hope that we can, I don't know what the best way to do it is, but meet with department heads, either invite them to our meetings or have Greg meet with them and report back to us, you know, something so that we can hear from them what problems they're facing, get a better idea of how their money's being spent and what alternatives are, you know, and both what are the things that they wish they could spend money on if they had it, that they feel is important but they just can't do, and what are things that maybe could be done better or don't need to be done or don't need to be done as often. A second thing I think is that I really want to reach out to the public to think about, you know, if the city's going to have to cut something, both like what would people want to cut, and also are there things that volunteers can do? I mean, obviously a volunteer can't be a fireman or you know, can't like arrest people like that, but like, are there places where people could be more engaged in running the city? And realistically, people don't have a lot of time, so I'm not, I mean, but, you know, if every resident gave an hour, that would be 14,000 hours, you know, over the course of the year, you know, it's something. So I hope we can think outside the box in those ways. And the third thing that I've been thinking about is, Ginny thank you for the really excellent training. She gave me a sort of debriefing on understanding the budget. And I think we need to be clear, first among ourselves, but then with council and with the public, about what does it take to run the city, what are I don't have a finance background, but I'm learning quickly, and you know, that balancing the budget is kind of this abstract idea that, like, but that there's many gray layers of gray in it. It's not really black and white. You know, if we balance, like, are we ultimately we need to be spending what we're earning, that in that way balanced. But when I look at the budget, and it looks like we're way over budget, but then Ginny explained that, you know, she's very conservative in her estimates, and so we actually typically don't spend as much as we think we're going to, and so that made me feel a little more comfortable about having that on paper, spending more than we're getting. So I think we can look statistically back at the last, whatever the right time frame is, 5 years, 10 years, and figure out sort of a realistic goal that we can aim at. We can't cut as much from the budget as without drastically hurting services as to balance on paper. But if at the end of the year we're even, then that's, and I don't know all the right terminology, but I think you guys understand what I'm getting at. So that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah. So one thing I think I heard almost all of us say, not everybody, was about communication, public input. And actually that's one part that we kind of skipped over, Mike, because I knew, you know, from talking to you that you had some ideas about public input as well. So the other thing that I picked up on as we're talking over this is just how much of a learning process this is, you know, for us, for the public, for everybody. And so I'm thinking that's just something for us to keep in mind as we move forward, that this is, you know, also a process that, you know, not only would educate us more on what's going on with the budget, but that we can also use it as a way to, you know, help the public be more informed as well. So those, I think, are things that we can keep in mind as we go forward. But with public input, I do think, you know, I mentioned before that I think public input is going to be an important part of this process. You know, for instance, you know, I know one of the things that has been tossed around, you know, on council is the idea of, you know, looking at the brush and yard waste program, and I know I had mentioned that.
It's like the only thing that's
Yeah,
ever on the chopping
it's
block.
the one that, you know, keeps coming up to mind, you know, and I had discussed it, you know, with my board at our last meeting, you know, because it was, I think, shortly after we had approved the budget maybe, and, you know, they wanted to talk about the budget and, you know, what we might be looking at, you know, for, you know, the following year, and I had talked about how we were you know, discussing the brush and yard waste program, and, you know, there was a lot of pushback against, you know, the idea of any reduction in brush and yard waste program, at least from the folks who were present at that meeting. So, you know, it did lead us into a good discussion, though, of, okay, you know, so when we want to maintain services at a certain level, we have to fund them, you know, and what that looks like.
But I think, can I just interject?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think that's something where, like what Mike brought up, like, is there another way that we can look at it that would provide an efficiency?
Yeah.
You know, so it may not be that we want to cut a service necessarily, but if we can figure out, and to your point also about getting, you know, different ideas in the room, if we can look at all those ideas and talk with the people who they will impact about how it will really impact them,
Yeah.
we might come to an agreement on something that's different than the way that we've ever done it before. And, you know, maybe it doesn't look the same, but is the end goal the same?
Yeah.
Which is that we, you know, provide the service to a level that people are okay with. So I hope that will leave space for that, and I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, and I guess that's, you know, that's the conversation I want to have, is that, like, what does that look like? Okay, so as we're going through, I guess, you know, maybe we're preempting this because we do also need to determine how we're going to, you know, review the budget, what process, you know, what method, you know, how we're going to do that. And then how do we work in the public input, you know, along with that, you know, because, you know, for instance, if we're going to be talking about a Department of Public Works one day, we want to talk about, you know, brush and yard waste program, how do we make sure that we get the kind of feedback, you know, from the public that we're looking for?
And I think, again, if I could interject, I'm so sorry, I do this a lot. One of the things that I had initially thought was, oh, like looking at each fund or each department, but sometimes a service touches multiple departments.
See, that's what I want to start with. I'd like to start with services. I'd like to define what is it the city government actually does for the public and move from there.
And how is it funded and who touches it? That might be a good idea, because like, you know, even with brush and yard waste,
Mhm.
like you have to stop and get a key at Central Garage. So Central Garage's opening hours and the person who does that are things that like factor into that. So,
It's
yeah,
also
it
paid
all
parking.
touches
Katie,
everything.
Katie brought this up
Yeah.
5 years ago, 6 years ago.
Oh, the
From her
permits?
experiment,
Yeah.
from her experience in Albany, I believe you
Albany.
lived there.
Yeah.
Is that, and everybody on council then looked at her like she was looking at a foreign object of, what are you talking about? Long-term residents. So if we want long-term residents in downtown Oneonta, we understand that the real estate the city owns, called parking lots, cost us money. And so how many people actually use that? What is the percentages? It's the same exercise that we went through at the legislative when we look at the fees. What is the percentage of the public actually using those services? When you talk about public safety, well, that goes for everybody. Everybody gets cross board, so they all get DPS also, right? Everybody touches a sidewalk, a street, lights go over their faucet, have clean drinking water come out of there, and byproducts leave the house or apartment, so, you know, that affects everybody. But when you get into paid parking or parking in general, whether it's street parking, parking lot, I think those are the things that this committee has an opportunity to have discussions about. Yard waste, you know, same thing, nobody wants to have that service taken away, but are they willing to pay for it? What does that look like? How often are you gonna do it? So those are the things that we have an opportunity to have a discussion about. So for me, I'd like to start at services, because that's pretty much the emphasis of what we're doing. We're providing a service to the general public.
Greg, from your perspective, do you think that's a reasonable thing that could be, the word is escaping me, but like, do you think you could just say, like, we provide these services?
That's,
I mean, is that?
the thing you referenced earlier in the meeting
Mhm.
that we did a couple years ago, where we reviewed service.
Oh,
That was
yeah,
our
and
first
I know
sort
you
of
did.
iteration, or, you know, on the way to developing a strategic plan. We listed every service the city provides, and that's what we talked about with
Okay.
department heads. So, you know, I can provide that again.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah,
Probably have
that'd
it
be
buried
nice.
somewhere in there, but.
And
I
really,
think it'd be
what we were
helpful.
talking about is strategic planning. You know, we've
Yeah.
done what we call the level 1 and level 2 with the council last summer, fall. The next step is me working with department heads to try to develop level 3. What actions do we think are gonna, you know, lead to the outcomes that we're seeking, and then reviewing those with council, and that's sort of an iterative process. We agree on something, and then that's it. That's what we're working on. Those are our priorities that we're, you know, judging our performance based on. And then we review those periodically, whether it's semi-annually, quarterly, certainly annually during the budget process. And I think as the world turns, or we change our priorities, we update the strategic plan, and then that should be informing the budget process,
Mhm.
because we're gonna be deciding to fund whatever it is we've prioritized. I think once we establish that and, you know, work out any kinks, then that should be a pretty intuitive process to follow.
And that just reminded me, when you were talking about the development of the strategic plan, because Len, I think you had brought up earlier, you know, that some folks had, you know, expressed frustration about the strategic plan. And I know that we have an update on the comprehensive plan, you know, coming. That was one of the grants that Judy had announced at the end of the year. And that comprehensive plan is really, that's the place where the community gets a lot of input. The strategic plan really comes after that, and that's more at the council and staff level. So, I mean, I asked Greg, because I didn't realize I was getting a book, to give me a printout of the comprehensive plan. So, you know, I perused it again this weekend, you know, because it had been a while since I looked. And there's a whole section, you know, on, you know, the public input that had been done. So I don't know what the update will look like, you know, but I'll look forward to seeing, you know, what that input will be like.
Yeah, I
Like,
think
light reading.
like this conversation you're having is timely because of that. We have this new comprehensive plan update that's coming along. That's when there's really heavy public input. It's really public driven. It's not even driven by the council. Council's involved, but it should be a lot of public input. And then from that, you get the high level 10-year-ish plan. And then the council every year should look at that and say, okay, we can't do everything in 1 year. This is a long-term plan. What's our this year plan, our strategic plan this year? And then work with the staff and myself to figure out what specific actions we're gonna pursue this year, this quarter, whatever it is. in pursuit of those, and then you keep updating that, and then every 5, 10, 15 years, whatever may make sense, you go and re-update the comprehensive plan.
Right, so that's the correlation that I've been looking for all these years is, this is what the council wants, this is what the public wants, but this is what we can afford. And what does that actually look like? Have we ever had that conversation with the general public and said, okay, if you wanna have X amount of firemen, X amount of cops, X amount of DPS, this is what it costs. And we don't collect that right now. We'll talk about revenue streams at some other point, but we need to make that correlation of what does that look like financially. It's not fair to Jenny or Greg to sit here and say, well, you know, we're gonna move this money here or here. And to Mike's point, most of the folks on council, this is a whole new thing, doing finance, doing budgets. And so you get lost in all of the information that comes down on top of you. That is the reason why we're having this committee, so that the four of us have a great understanding, and if Don keeps coming, a great understanding of what are the services and how much does it cost. Again, I go back to the exercise that we did in legislative, where just to rent the pavilion, what services are involved, and the department heads had an opportunity to put all that in there, and what does it actually cost, and what does the city actually collect? What did it work out to be? We didn't even get to 20% of the cost, right, Kate? So that's the problem that we have today. And so if we're gonna increase those service costs, then what does that look like for the tax levy rate? Are we gonna increase that also? And so that's the discussions we should be having for the next 10, 11, 12 months. Because it's not fair to Ginny to try and shuffle through all that. I mean, I look at the amount of information that Ginny's given me, and I think I collect all of these, Ginny, they're in my office anyways.
Oh, I keep wanting to bring my binder back to you.
You know, cause I like numbers, but, you know, the presentation that she has done is just grown in the last 5 years. I think there was folks that were sitting on that side of the dais that did not understand the levity of the situation until, not this year, not in 24, but in 23, the levity of the situation, but it was because of the graphics that she provided. It was like 11 by 17, or it was even bigger than that. And then all of a sudden, that visualization got their attention. They're like, whoa. So the words that we had been
Visuals.
communicating didn't
Yeah.
work. It was the visualization of the position we're in financially that Ginny had drawn up for us that actually got their attention. They actually knew where we're headed. I mean, the reality is, it's not her responsibility, it's not Greg's responsibility, it's our responsibility to figure out how we're going to shrink that 1.8. We need 1.8. And if 1.6, okay, 1.6. But to Mike's point, because he was listening to what Ginny said, in years past, what's saved us is sales tax, right? So sales tax she's very conservative on how she approaches that. Definitely we're in a line there. And that comes back to pay dividends for us at the end of the year. And then all the department heads are fiscally conservative. There's nobody out there that's wasting money. And there's always money left over at the end of the year. But I like Mike's idea about having, at some point, the department heads come before us and explain their vision of the department. I know that they're doing that with Greg, but I think it would be good for the council as a whole maybe to hear that also. So that might be something that we can talk about for ideas. But starting now is gonna give this council the best opportunity to realistically look at the direction and the vision. Direction is how we're gonna pay for it, vision is what is it you actually want. So those are two paths, and that's the correlation that I've been talking about. I haven't seen how we're going to put them together. Because I can't go to the general public and say, we're gonna increase your tax levy rate by 34%. It's just unrealistic.
So, Len, you talked about services, and I think especially where I see us going is the service, looking side by side at services and the cost it costs to provide them. But if we can do that globally, because I don't really have a sense. I mean, I've heard this example of park shelters a couple times now, but I don't have a sense across the city, what does it cost the city to provide a service, waste pickup, or, or yard waste, or clean water, or, compared to how much people are putting in, and that's where we can look at whether fees in some cases should be raised, or if something, we may find some things that are really out of balance. So that's on one front, but I'm concerned that we not get stuck in that and lose the even bigger picture of, how can I wish I had more of the fiscal terms to try to say what I'm trying to say, but that it's not just revenue and expenses, that there's also okay, let me say it a different way. You're talking about services that some people use versus everybody uses.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how we can wrestle with how to value a service that only a smaller number of people use, because I'm sure there's very few people who use every service the city offers. So
I would agree.
so just because only a small number of people are using a service doesn't mean it's less valuable. But I do think that we should set our goal for ourselves of being able to understand it so that we can communicate it either directly to our constituents or through maybe the city putting out a summary paper that can be widely distributed so that people can share some understanding that we're sharing. Because I agree that people will object if their taxes go way up, but if they see, I'm only actually paying 2/3 of the cost that it costs the city to provide me with drinking water, then people look at it differently.
Yeah, I think some of it is awareness for sure.
Yeah, and I'm even thinking about like the suggestion about like having visuals, like just breaking it down, because I know I found, those very helpful as well. So I think that's something that we can keep in mind, as far as communicating and, with the public and, making sure that we're keeping everybody informed. So, okay. Do we want to talk about this process a little bit more, and then we can look at this form before as well? But it sounds like we're leaning towards looking at services instead of like going through the budget in a different way, right? Is that what do you think, Kate? Let's just go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I like the idea of looking at services and then, being able to highlight. So what I wrote down is, what do we provide, which we have a list of, how much does it cost, and which departments touch it. And then I think, once it's, like Lynn said, it's not up to us, I don't think, to go through the budget line by line with a scalpel, but, once we understand the cost of things, and, Mike, you raised a really good point, which I've heard from Ginny before too, which is like, it's the point of the city to provide services. So, not everything can be quantified, but I think even just having the awareness allows us to make an informed decision about it. So I think the conversation will be good. But yeah, I feel like that's the best way. I mean, I think as long as there's like the background information, that it's not just us talking, because I think we do have to tie it back to the budget so we can like physically see, the impact in black and white of some of these things. And it may not always be black and white, but I think as much as possible. Yeah, I think as long as the background is there, then it's easy to, it will help us understand it, and it's not a value judgment at that point, there's more data behind it, so.
Okay, so before I talk about a 5-year plan, Mike, to your point, the exercise that we went through on renting the pavilion taught us that the city provides services and that we cannot capitalize 100% of the return. So to your point, 80% of the cost is still on the table. It's still borne by 100% of the residents that are here.
Right.
We also need to identify the services that non-residents participate in. Now that you're part of council, you'll get patted on the back, and after July 4th, someone will say, thank you very much for the fireworks, and there'll be this spot of guilt in you. I said, well, I didn't actually provide them. We provided the public safety aspect,
Right.
but we didn't provide the money for the fireworks.
Right.
Ben Gunther does that for us. And so those are the partnerships maybe you were trying to think of and maybe explain to us of what you're thinking. But yeah, I think there's opportunities for that. But then ultimately, I'd like to see us get to where this committee develops a 5-year plan. I think we need to come up with something that we can communicate to the public to say, okay, we're going to look at expenses, we're gonna reduce expenses, but we're gonna increase the tax levy. And this is the reason why, because the services that we wanna provide are this. And in order to provide these services that the general public has expressed an interest in, that's what it's gonna cost us. I need to do a better job in my position to communicate those costs to the not only the residents of the Fifth Ward, but to the city of Oneonta residents. I don't think they understand truly what it costs to run the city of Oneonta. Who was talking about a gallon of water? Was it you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a gallon of water is what, half a penny? Yeah, so go over to a grocery store, we'll leave them all nameless. You're not gonna spend just a half a penny, right? So we have probably the best drinking water in multiple counties, and we pay a half a penny for it. And so I'm really looking forward to Waterworth and the presentation at the end of the first quarter, because I think there's an opportunity for us to run our utilities, which is water and sewer, more like a utility company in the aspect of people are so used to their monthly payment that once they have that tap fee, they move over to a monthly payment. We're gonna see our water conservation, that's the part that drives me nuts. It's not just the cost, it's the folks, I've met so many folks through the years that they know that they're paying a certain amount, and they know that they'll never get to the amount of gallons. So they're out there washing their driveway in their house, and that's just wasting water, and that's a precious commodity, which 2 years in a row, I think we've come close to, having a water conservation. I mean, this year we weren't quite there, or 24 we were close. But, so I think those are just public engagements is where we need to go with this.
Can you just follow up on one thing that Lynn said as well? It's just too about, I think, understanding, like, some things are not necessarily paid for by tax dollars. So I think an understanding of like the aid that we receive for certain things is helpful as well. To recognize that sometimes we can pay for things without, it costing taxpayers really anything. But then also looking at the cost of administering some of that stuff, administering some of that stuff. Because I think sometimes we think that it's like free, but it's not free. It's just heavily funded by aid.
Right.
Sorry, it's just something you said made me think of that, and I wanted to get it out because I forget things quickly. Thank you.
Yeah, 'cause it's still gotta be considered and worked in.
Right, yeah, not everything is a direct cost to the taxpayer.
Mike, what did you think about, the idea of reviewing the budget by services?
I think that's a good place to start. But I think, I could see a plan for the year. How many city departments are there?
10, essentially.
10? Like, if we're talking about February until, I feel like we should try to wrap up our work in some way in order to re-engage the rest of council on it by the end of the summer, it seems like. So we're really talking like 6 months.
Yeah.
So I think I would structure it where take first month to sort of a more global view. Services is a nice way to look at it more globally. And then maybe every month look at 2 departments. And Katie said you didn't want to go line by line through the budget, but I think it's probably useful for, we don't have to do that as a committee, but for each of us to read the budget for that department so that we can really engage in a meaningful way with the department about that budget and figure out what's a priority and what isn't, with the goal of by, I don't know, you guys tell me, August, September, having some
August,
recommendations.
we're into the budget season.
Yeah.
Having some
July we started, right?
some preliminary recommendations to the rest of council about how to shape the budget process, like where we see areas that there could be cutting, where we see areas that actually some things are underfunded, you know.
So, and if we came up, yeah, but what I was just thinking is if we did that, like if we look over the list, you know, at our next meeting, come up with a plan of exactly, you know, which ones we wanna go through and how, we could, you know, do that general look, right? And then also come up with a schedule, of the following months and which services we wanted to look at and invite department heads based on, you know, whatever schedule we come up with. Because Mike, you're absolutely right, you know, it's not that we can plan to extend this work through December, right? Because by the time December comes, you know, we're meeting at the end of the month, so budget will be done. So yeah, I think that's probably a good timeline to aim for, right? Like the end of August? So, I mean, because we started in July, correct? I think with the initial introduction, but we really, really got into the planning in fall. I remember is when we started our almost weekly meetings, correct? Okay. So,
Yeah, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth, and I
Okay.
think that we can kind of do both things, which is when we look at services, look at, you know, if we have an understanding of who touches them, then we can look at those budgets and understand, you know, the cost implications, because I think we do have to tie it back to the document, which is the reason that we're here.
yes.
But I think, again, like looking at a department in a silo isn't necessarily the most effective way. Like, so, and also to be clear, like we did do that a couple of years ago, and not that it wasn't effective, but I think it is it's a lot, I think, bigger picture, and I think that's gonna draw out our conversations maybe more than, I think it will be more efficient. Let me say it that way, to look at services and then invite the departments that service touches, and then also review their budget so that we understand, you know, where this is coming from, just to be as informed as possible for that conversation. But I do think that we kind of risk getting a lot of information and then maybe not being able to put it together and move it forward in a way that is efficient if we try to go department by department.
Well, one idea I had, I think this was to Elaine, was that we could perhaps dovetail departments, how we look at departments in some way, so that at the end of a meeting, we sort of maybe we look at their budget, we think of questions that we want to ask to do some groundwork, so that Greg and the department head can have that month to then prepare, so that, like, I mean, just pick any department, DPW.
Yes, as
Like-
Max
like-
for an example.
like,
Thank you.
Like, so we've already talked about the services they provide, and then we look at their budget for, I don't know, without a lot of previous thought about it, but have some preliminary questions that then we can feed to them. And I also think there's some standard questions that we'll come up with that would apply to pretty much every department. So that then a month later, we can talk to department head, hopefully by the end of the first part of the meeting, come up with some agreement or some conclusions about either the way, the future work that needs to be done between then and August, or thoughts about maybe where the budget could be revised. So we say February, or March, last 20 minutes of the meeting, we talk about DPW, and then the beginning of the April meeting, we meet with the DPW person and.
Yeah. I forgot you had brought up that idea, and I think that, you know, like, if we think about next month, okay, if we started off February just by doing that general look at those services, okay, coming up with the schedule that we want to determine. And then at the end of the meeting, then we hone in on whichever, two we've decided we want to look at, and we come up with the questions and our thoughts, our initial thoughts, so that we can get some reporting back from them and invite them to come to that next meeting for some engagement and discussion. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then at that meeting, which would then be March, we talk about whatever services those are, we get through that, and then at the end, we do another work session of, okay, what's the next, and what questions are we bringing up for that?
Sounds good.
As far as public input, I feel like, although it's the way we do public input on in council meetings where everyone has their 3 minutes is a fair way to distribute time among people, but it's not the best way for conversation. And I wonder if somewhere in these meetings we have, I don't expect this gallery to be full very often, but a chance for us, take an intermission where we can, all of us, go and engage with the people who are here and let them ask questions, or something that's more participatory than just people making their 3-minute speeches. Maybe if the people in the audience have heard us ask the department chair questions, and that then, have a 10-minute recess where people can ask us questions, or have a chance where people can submit their own questions. Like, I don't really want to sit here and have, people making speeches about why yard waste is essential and we can't cut it. That doesn't seem like a productive use of all of our time, but if the members of the public have ideas or questions, we should compile those. And maybe compile them in an ongoing way, an ongoing document, so that
Correct.
by August we have
Correct.
a sort of divided by department or divided in some way, all the questions that have come up from the public during the course of the 6 months.
Yeah,
The public
good idea.
and us.
And us, yeah.
Right. Right. Exactly. Creates that open dialogue
Right.
with the general public, which I think they want.
Right.
And they need to know.
Yeah.
Because the costs have just gone up and up and up, and they don't know that.
And Ginny,
Do
has something
you mind
to
if I
share?
interject? Yes, please. Greg, is that right?
Yep.
Thank you. Greg had brought an idea to me a while back that I don't know if he's discussed it with council yet, about a survey tool that we can actually put, I believe, on our website. Greg, I'm forgetting the name of it.
Flash vote?
Flash, yeah, where we could actually, it will cost money, so, we would have to fund it, but we would be able to get that out to everybody in the city, and they would be able to fill out those questions or survey answers or whatever, to help
Mhm.
guide you in your discussions. It's something to consider, but it would have to be funded to do that.
Mhm.
I really think it would be a great tool,
Mhm.
for getting public input without them having to come here. Also, I have found in my history that when people are not here, it's because they're content. And then when something upsets the public, then the people that get upset are here, but you still have a great percentage of the public that are still content. So by being able to reach out to more people that, one, are not able to attend, but able to voice their opinions in an almost private setting at their own home through this survey tool, I think it would really be beneficial for the council to consider that.
Absolutely, because it's
Yeah.
not just private, it's convenient.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the problem, is those hard benches are
Accessible, right?
not convenient.
Yeah.
Right.
And our times of meetings are not convenient, so
Work,
People
work
work
at
at
night,
get
or,
that.
yeah, no.
I mean,
So-
most people that I talk to do not have the time to come here,
No.
and sit
No.
up,
100%.
And,
The other thing I
and so you're right,
Even
until
if
it
they know
personally
that it's
affects them,
happening.
Yeah.
they're not
So-
gonna get involved.
Right, and the only other thing I wanted to stress is the first 8 pages of the budget summarizes all the services that we provide.
Mhm.
So that would be just
Oh,
an
that's a good
8-page
idea.
handout, for those who want to see. Because what we have to do with the state, when we do our annual report, we have to actually report expenses by service area. So they'll want to know the cost for public safety, for transportation, for culture and recreation, things like that. So this is a quick summary of the type of services that we need to have. And
So,
Was that? what
So
we were
that,
talking about?
I'll send that around after the meeting, but we have,
Yeah.
it's a list of services, it's not necessarily tied to department, like obviously some of them are almost entirely one, you know, fire
Yeah.
protection or
Mhm.
something is obviously fire department and so on, but it lists brush pickup, you know. Central garage is gonna touch in some way most of those departments that have equipment. We didn't go to the extent of listing, you know, all the departments and saying, you know, put an X here if it touches this, or we could do that exercise as a group here. But yeah, I'll send that back around, I think that'll be helpful.
Yeah.
As a starting point.
Cool. A couple of things that occur to me is that, you know, going through by services, I feel like would be easier for the public to grasp, you know,
That's true,
exactly what we're, because
It's a really good point.
most people are not sitting and looking at the budget line by line and, you know, having the benefit of the 3-inch binders that we have. So, you know, I think it would just make it more tangible for people. Also, once we come up with our, you know, schedule next time of, you know, how we want to go through it, you know, we could publish that and let people know ahead of time so that if they know that there's something that they're really invested in and they want to, you know, give input, they know when they would need to do that by, okay? You know, we can still determine, I mean, I think it sounds great to have some kind of survey tool, because I do love the idea of it being more accessible, you know, especially, and getting more participation. So, yeah, I think that'd be excellent.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good idea.
what kind of questions do you imagine asking the public in the survey? And also, are you thinking, like this is something that we do monthly, that we're talking about DPW this month, so the survey this month is focusing on DPW? Like, or
I
what
guess
are your
we'd
thoughts?
have to think about it, because I don't know what the survey tool looks like, and I don't know if it would just be more general, you know? We'd have to devise that.
So, something like this, Mike, just off the top of my bald head, is asking questions like, are you satisfied with the sidewalks in your neighborhood? Are you satisfied with the streets? Or, let me back up. If you're not satisfied, what is wrong with your sidewalks? You know,
I think we'd wanna
give
be
some
careful, I
examples.
think I'd wanna be careful about opening it up to, you know, maybe more than what the budget review committee needs, but, I think we'd have to craft some of that language around, you know, what kind of input we would wanna get. Cause we'd want it to be specific, you know, to, I think, you know, relating to that, you know, the cost and, you know, benefit, you know, what is, you know, worth it, you know, what are the most important things, you know, maybe asking people, you know, more general things than, you know, specifically what they think of their sidewalk or something, I'm not sure.
I'll give you an example. So, a street in my ward was tore up for NYSEG. The general public didn't know that it was for NYSEG until they were knee-deep in it for a while. So my phone was ringing, going, what city project's going on? And I'm like, I don't know of any city project going on. So they'll all critique the work as they go through. And so as the representative, you're finding out now that you get to hear the critiques of what was happening or didn't happen. Well, why didn't you do this? What was this done?
Mhm.
And so it's okay to ask them what they think. You know, there's lots of different perspectives. There's 9 perspectives on this dais. But just asking your constituents, you know, what do you think of the conditions of your sidewalk? Is not an open-ended question to the point where you think you're gonna be overrun. I think only 10% of the people are actually gonna get engaged. I think our surveys that I've participated in or have heard about, it's less than that. I mean, we tried giving money away through lead pipe and got, what, 1%? Not even, you know, so it's going to be a low percentage. So I like Ginny's idea about having an electronic survey because hopefully we can get to 10%. It would be nice to have 20-25% engaged. But I don't think that's gonna happen.
Yeah, that's probably, I don't know what survey return rates are these days, but I imagine that's probably pretty high. I think the more we can get though, absolutely the better. You know, I think what I'm saying is that I'm thinking more of an open-ended, you know, opportunity for people, like, you know, if what we're trying to do is give them an opportunity to give us questions prior to the meeting, you know, so that we have a list or, you know, can develop something, you know, that can be shareable even. That, you know, just to keep that a little more open-ended so that they could, you know, provide us responses rather than, you know, seeking specific responses from them.
And you can also ask them questions like, do you know what services your fire department provides.
Sure.
Do you know what services your police department, your code enforcement? Ask them for answering questions. See what they actually know.
Okay, so it sounds like first we gotta see if this, survey tool is a possibility, because it sounds like it would be great, but what is
would the
needed for it,
cost be?
yeah,
It's probably based on how many times and how many questions.
$10,000 or $12,000 per year. Our thought was now that we were hoping to get the comprehensive plan grant, we've got that grant, so hopefully through that we can, get a year's membership or subscription, something like that.
Nice.
We can have a presentation by the company to explain how it works. I
Mhm.
think you'd be pretty interested to hear about it. I can arrange that sometime if you want to. I don't know that at this committee meeting is necessarily
yeah.
you take the time of this committee, but we can do that when the time's right. You don't wanna overwhelm people with surveys constantly.
Right.
You wanna make sure that they're worded correctly. This company will help with
Yeah.
that, so that it's not leading questions. And it's
Yeah, 'cause
not
I know
just
that's-
gonna get the result you want.
I did one of the things that I learned a lot from was taking like statistics in college, and I know that like asking questions the right way to get the answers you want, that you're actually seeking, is really important. So we wanna make sure that was good.
I just wanted to add one
Yeah,
thought about
go
the
for it.
surveys. We don't want to deluge people, but on the other hand, I feel like if it's something that people come to expect monthly and it's short, that
Mhm.
people, I think, will get repeat engagement from some people at least, and I mean, there's no reason necessarily that we have to close a past survey. If we've already talked about DPW, but if somebody still wants to do the DPW survey from last month, they
Let them do it.
could do it.
Yeah.
I also think, I don't know how we incentivize participation, but I think we could think creatively about, randomly win dinner, going out to dinner with your council person, or I don't know, like,
That would
Yeah.
reduce.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just made that up,
Get a cushion
but
for the next council meeting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just
Not
mean-
me cushion, like we buy one
Me cushion.
and you get dibs.
Survey cushion.
Yeah, it lives here, you don't get to take it home.
So, just out of curiosity, this subscription for the survey service, is that something that like you subscribe and then you can do as many as you want, or is it okay? That's good to know because
Yeah. I mean, they
I
said
know
that
just from other
typically
I've
they're-
heard some other committees that were like, oh, it'd be nice to be able to. So it might have some
Yeah.
wide-ranging applications. It sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it said that most of their customers will do 6 to 12 a year, but there's
Okay.
really no limit on
Okay.
how many you want to do.
Nice.
It's interesting, like the premise of it, they'll get results in 48 hours. So they set up a survey panel that they set up, we don't know who they are. And it's intended to be, now we can ask more questions and learn more about it, how they can guarantee this, but a cross-section of the demographics of your community. So it's not, a lot of times you put a survey out there, people self-select. They say,
Yeah.
that's an interesting issue, I'm angry about that, or I really love that, so I'm gonna respond to that. I'm gonna call my friends who agree with me, and they're gonna respond the same way, and we're gonna flood the survey and skew the results to the
Yeah, that's what I
minority
was
who
gonna
are
say. It sounds
motivated.
like-
Where this is, the idea is to get a more of a even cross-section.
Yeah.
So that you're getting a better idea of what the whole community thinks, not just the local few.
Interesting.
But other people you can still share, you see the difference in the results and their examples from other communities. You'll see a blue line that shows the people that were contacted for this is how they responded, and then everyone else, in aggregate responded differently because, obviously the people that felt strongly called their friend and said,
Yeah.
oh, do the survey. So you see how that impacts.
So-
It's interesting.
That is really interesting to know, because I know when Public Arts was reviewing results of a survey, that was a concern, was would people load it up, or would people vote from other places and overwhelm, city? So it's good to know that there's some of those controls, in place. Okay. All right. So is there anything else with public input or, our process? It sounds like we're getting closer. Should we look at this draft form here now? Budget expenditure review form? I know it just got handed out, so if everybody wants to take a moment to check that out.
yeah, I have it on here too.
And we have think it started off in one of the other committee memos, and then we just tacked on what we thought might be
Don, do you,
useful for this work.
do you want a copy of the form?
No, no.
So what do we think about that? And do we wanna alter this at all now that we're talking about, we've determined how we're gonna go through the budget? Of services. It's like right off the bat, I'm thinking maybe that's what we need as a header on here, is which service we're starting with.
Right.
Cause again, when this is just a draft, so I think if we can add something at the top, like right at the top under date, so that we know,
What the service is.
Yep, which one we're
What does
starting
it
with.
actually do?
yep.
Yeah, I mean, this is in a similar format as
Yeah.
the finance resources forms, but really it's kind of a different approach where the committee would be filling this out to send out to the council to say this is what we're recommending and why. So your initial conversation isn't really focused on budget codes, but you think that you would eventually come back to that after you've evaluated services departments and then coming back and say, this is a recommendation as far as in terms of the budget. So you probably would still have a budget code you're talking about, but adding in what service or services does this affect, and then everything else on there probably still applies. So, yeah.
Based
Change it
on-
however you think is necessary.
Based on our conversation so far tonight, I have a hard time imagining how we would get to the point of sort of the amount line, which I know that's the bottom line, but obviously, but I don't know exactly. We're talking at a sort of higher level, not talking, the way we've been talking about our work, we would sort of more globally, like what services, what departments need to change in what ways, not a dollar amount, but maybe we'll get to that eventually, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the idea is if we go through that discussion and it results in, a recommendation, this is the form that we would use to report that back to council.
Agreed. I don't think this is the form that we're gonna use for this committee to get through the services.
Oh, right, yeah, and if we wanna, come up with maybe a template or something that we use of, how we, what questions, or form, we come up with, maybe that's something we do as well. But,
Well, I think that would help also if you came up with a form that generalizes our discussions tonight, so that
Yeah.
it's not only good for the committee members, but for the department heads moving forward, even for the public to take a look at what is it that we're actually looking at, so.
Like that
if-
actual format that we were talking about, you mean?
Right, so I
Yep.
mean, if you create a form for us to use, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, so like a review form. This is like our presentation to the council, but our form, like the internal one that we'll use for review, right?
Right, I mean, if we're gonna have a conversation, you mentioned earlier you wanted us to have our questions prepped, so then that's where I'm
Yeah, so we can
headed.
get some feedback going.
So that we're all on the same page, the format is the same, so that
Okay.
we're all on the same page.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good idea, because that's where we'd start off with, I'm just gonna jot down some ideas like services, what our questions are, okay. I think that is a good idea, because I like anything that we can do that'll kind of help standardize it, it'll make it easier for us to, continue that on.
As Mike was saying, that provides the consistency
Yeah.
that we're gonna need to be successful.
Yeah, I always find if I have something prepped, it's way easier to go back to than
Correct.
making it new every
Correct.
single time, right? Okay. So that's something we can work on, as well. Are there, I'm thinking for that form, just to get us started, like, we'd wanna know the service, we'd wanna have some basic questions, we'd wanna determine who we're inviting, right? So the
Mhm.
department head or invitees. What other items might we wanna have on that? Any ideas at this point? Or we can think about that for next time too.
I mean, what our questions are, there's multiple different levels of that. And if we think systematically, there's questions about cost, there's questions about individual services, there's questions about sort of the behind the scenes stuff that we don't normally see, the department heads would see like what are, you know, what are inefficiencies, what are, you know, like just
Okay.
learn, like just for example, like learning how much overtime pay the fire department spent last year, you know, seems like an inefficiency to me, whereas, I mean, I don't know, cause I don't, again, I haven't done the numbers, but if you are fully staffed, then you don't have to have as many people working overtime in the end, that probably saves money. So, I mean, but that's the kind of thing that neither we nor the public would see from the outside. So questions that can get to that kind of
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah, I don't think there's gonna be generic questions that you're gonna be able to ask to each of the
No,
8 or
I
9
don't think so.
departments. I just
No.
don't see that.
No.
You know, but there's also, I wanna have an opportunity of, does the department head see a partnership, shared services?
Mhm.
You know, partnership's one thing. A good example is partnering with the YMCA for the summer program. Ginny went through that with us several years ago of how much difficulty on hiring that temporary staff was for the city to do. I don't remember if you touched on about insurance, but then by partnering with the YMCA, you know, Frank Russo as the director was able to take that program over and create a more efficient program for the young people. And I think those are the things that we can be looking at also.
Yeah, partnership. The other thing I'm just kind of thinking, because I agree, there's not gonna be, I think there's gonna be specific questions, but as an overarching way of looking at, I'm almost wondering, like, are you guys familiar with like SWOT at all? Like SWOT, have you heard of that? Like strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, right? And this idea of looking at, you know, internally, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and then externally, what are the opportunities, what are the threats, and we can maybe just use that as like a framework of looking at each of these departments, you know, so that they could, like, because I heard that coming up is that, you know, what do departments feel is working well, what do they identify, you know, and start to get at some of that, and then also, you know, work in our more specific questions too. But that might be a framework to kind of keep us focused on
Okay.
with that.
That makes sense.
What was that acronym again?
SWOT.
SWOT?
SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats.
Okay.
All right.
I wonder, how, like, is this the best forum, this room, which I already don't like the layout of, to have these conversations with the department heads or with, you know,
What do you think?
like,
Because we need to be transparent, so.
where
that
we need
camera's
to be
gotta-
live streamed. I just wish we
Yeah.
had a round table that we could sit around instead of this dais.
We don't have the owl anymore, do we?
No, I think we could make it, well, it depends on occupancy, but we could make it work in the conference room probably, depending on how many people we get.
I mean, I don't know if it makes that much difference, but I do feel like, I don't know, I feel like, justice, looking down on my civilians, I don't, I just don't know whether, like, I'm also thinking about the format that we just come up with, that I don't want the department heads to come here feeling defensive, like they're here to defend their department. And, I mean, we're trying to understand a little bit. Maybe it's worthwhile for each of us in turn to, if the departments head are willing, to sort of tour / go, divide up the departments and each of us go and talk to you know, sort of see on the ground. Like, I just feel like when I talk to staff and like see a place, like it just, I give a different understanding of it. So like if we're gonna say, if March's Department of Public Works, like one or two of us can go out there and talk to them and go and ride along while they're, or go along when they're like fixing a sewer or whatever they're doing, you know, and, like is that, cause I'm just thinking like in a 2-hour meeting format, if we're gonna spend half of that talking to department head, that's 1 hour, that's, if we're not already prepared and knowledgeable, that hour's gonna fly by.
Greg, what do you think about this, about meeting with department heads and how we work all that out?
Yeah, I think Mike's suggestion is a good one. I think, you know, getting out there and seeing what it is that is being done is always educational. I mean, like the tour of the water system we did, I think that's educational. Everyone always comes away with those things,
Yeah.
learning something. You just get a real perspective. It's
Yeah.
not just, you know, it's one thing here, department heads sit there for an hour and tell you all the things that their department does, and that's impressive, but then, you know, you don't have the visual to go along with it. You're not gonna get every visual in 1 hour, 2 hours ride along, but you're gonna get an idea. So I think that's good.
I think that'd be a good idea, and we'll have to figure out amongst ourselves how we figure that out, because I don't think all of us are gonna have time to do that every single month, and also, if we all showed up, we'd have a quorum,
No,
so.
no, I was, sorry to be clear, I was
Yeah.
thinking that 1 or 2 of us per department.
Yeah, that's what I.
So like, so if we're
yeah.
doing two departments a month, maybe you can switch out each month who we're like,
Yeah.
each of us go visit one department, you know,
Well, especially if we could like witness the service that we're going to talk about.
right, yeah.
And I always find, I like doing it if we can arrange it like in partners too, just because I find those kinds of conversations, I often get more out of them, you know, with more interaction.
Yeah, but I agree in terms of the perception could be, especially because they're not here tonight to hear us say that we're not here to just like find fault with what they're doing and decimate their budget. So coming here and sitting there, and I mean, at the very least, if they could sit here with us, that would be good, I think. So it's just more like a here conversation and less like a pitch, you know, to
Yeah.
save your funding. Like that's not, you know, what we want. But I think that just like like you said, the physical setup of the room kind of makes it feel that way,
It
sort of no
does,
matter
yeah.
what. So I like the idea of all sitting around the same table, whether that's in there or in here, for the physical meeting portion where we're having a discussion.
Maybe the next meeting would be a good opportunity to do that when we're sitting down with that list of, you know, like looking at our budgets, going over the list of, you know, services and really digging out how we want to, you know, accomplish that. Is everybody agreeable to trying that?
Yes?
Sure.
Okay. I mean, going forward, we might wanna come back here, cause there are gonna be more, you know, invitations, you know, and we'll see how that works out, but, we can determine that next time then. Alright, so it sounds like what we're coming into agreement about is that, you know, the process, you know, is gonna involve going through by services. We're gonna come up with our plan of action next time of how we're going to go through, you know, which ones, and come up with a schedule. And from that schedule, we'll determine how we'll make that public, you know, and you know, gather input from the public with that. And we'll also come up with a plan for some pre-meetings with the departments. We'll come up with assignments, you know, amongst ourselves, who wants to, you know, go to which, and we'll come up with that schedule, so that we can move forward. And, yeah. What else did I leave? Is there anything else that I left out of that we should discuss today? I mean, I think we made progress with our forms and coming up with a new one. We can, you know, come up with a template for that.
I just wanna add, I don't have any real opinion about order of departments over the course of the year, except I think maybe we should start with something easier. I don't know what's easier. whatever departments are smaller, have less moving pieces. And all of you have more experience than I do with, you know, the functions of these different departments. So, but I don't know, also, I'll open to Greg if you or Jenny or Carrie, if you guys have ideas about what makes sense.
I don't know, whatever you, what's that?
Oh, I was just asking Elaine if that's what you thought we might determine next time.
Yeah, I think that's what we'll you know, go
Right.
through our initial and everything, but certainly if you have suggestions of what would make sense, like what might be maybe easier for us to kind of wrap our heads around to just get ourselves started, you know, that would be helpful, so.
That's why, to be clear, that's why I was asking the question now, so that we could
Yeah.
think to make a decision next time.
Right, and I mean, nothing stops us from having a conversation via email either.
Right, we can.
We're four, so public officers law, we're five. We can have conversations via email. It's when you're talking full council, that's where we run into a problem.
I just want to remind you, when you look at, public service with Chris Yakabuchi, he has several departments. So you may be meeting with him more than once. So
Okay.
I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah.
Water, sewer,
Streets,
transportation,
parks.
streets, parks.
So that's something we'll wanna keep in mind as we go through that schedule too, cause maybe we could kinda lump some of those things together too.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
What do you mean by lumping?
Well, what I'm thinking is if there's several services that Chris would be involved in talk about, maybe schedule them all for one meeting rather than 3 different meetings.
Yeah, and also thinking about the time of the year, because if
Oh, good
if
call.
the idea is to witness them firsthand, then we probably want to talk about parks
Right.
generally
Yeah.
in the summertime,
Mhm.
so that we can see.
But I would also like to ask Chris before we do that, because he does have he has quite a spread of responsibility. I would like to ask him what he feels comfortable identifying. I don't know if he necessarily, I don't think I would wanna represent all of those parts in one night.
Oh,
That's
sure.
a lot.
Okay,
Oh,
yeah.
right. Well, I think also, if I know Chris, like, he won't necessarily be the only one who would speak on those, because they're the people who then oversee all those things,
Mhm.
and like, when we went for the water tour, you know, we had Chris, but then we also had the people who run the water plant, so I don't think it's like, you know, he's probably not gonna come and talk about everything on his own, so. would be
And that's
my
where we
guess.
could determine with who we wanna invite, you know, for
Right.
these. Okay.
I'm writing down, what can we lump together for efficient meetings without
Mhm.
being overwhelming? Okay.
Okay.
One question, I'm just
Yeah.
looking at the list here of departments. I see 15 departments, but 5 of them are more administrative departments, so is that, when we're talking departments, we're talking about sort of, I don't know how you, how to define it, public facing, that's not the right word either. You know, like, yes, the city assessor and city clerk and that kind of stuff is a very different kind of department than parks, so.
I think you guys talked about starting with services.
Yeah.
And then I assume you're not gonna go through A through Z, every service the city provides, but if we send a list to you, then maybe the next meeting, you pare that down to the ones you're interested in looking at more closely, and then we figure out what departments that involves and who should be
Right.
involved in that.
Right.
So you're probably not gonna be talking to the city assessor, who's a county employee that we contract with, and maybe you are, but you might, you know, be talking to just about everyone else, I don't know.
Right.
Okay. Everybody feel like we have a good plan?
I do.